a guy strutting in sky-high heels. Two girls in the corner, cuddled up together. Athletic hunks on the dance floor, who are, of course, shirtless. A distinguished gentleman is treating a group of young female students to champagne. Paris, Marais district. The vibe in local queer bars hasn't changed since the 60s, when someone walked into one of these establishments, a club tied to the extremist LGBT movement banned in Russia. A prominent Soviet citizen entered, dressed in a bright, colorful shirt, and behind him, two more followed, in plain clothes. The well-known citizen was a celebrated dancer of Leningrad's Kirov theater, Rudolf Nureyev, for whom stepping foot into such a bar was nothing short of a bold and daring leap into the unknown expanse of space. Love and freedom. Wait, is that even possible? Of course not. Those two plainclothes guys, KGB officers, would reply to him. In France, criminal prosecution of same-sex couples was abolished. Incredible. Way back in the 1790s, as a result of the French Revolution. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, right up until its collapse, the repressive Article 121, sodomy, was in effect. And the brutal practice of conversion therapy was in full swing. Ever heard of it? It's when they try to cure someone of their so-called wrong orientation with punitive psychiatry, heavy drugs, and electroshock therapy. Of course, the Soviet dancer understood that if anyone ever found out about his secret visit to Marais, it would mean the end of his tours, his career, and maybe even his life. Perhaps he had already planned his famous leap to freedom at the airport, but that only made this night in Marais all the more exciting, and all the most beautiful men would be at his feet. By the way, have you ever wondered why gay parties are always the wildest? Why pride parades are so vibrant? Because throughout human history, tomorrow might never come for people like that. Constant oppression, threats, violence, living in perpetual fear of punishment is unbearable. You just want to escape, even for one night, and lose yourself in the dance as if it's the last time. It's a lot like ballet. Ballet is about the illusion of freedom. In the evening, you're literally soaring through the air, basking in flowers, and by morning, you're back to a world of humiliation, injuries, and abuse. Ballet breaks you, especially Soviet ballet. And when finally you gain or fight tirelessly for the freedom to truly be yourself, it's not so easy to stop. Hungry throughout his childhood, Nureyev dreamed, very un-Soviet-like, of great wealth and lavish luxury. It came true. After escaping the USSR, he had stunning villas on the French Riviera and in the Antilles, a sprawling ranch in Virginia, and lavish apartments in London and New York. But even that wasn't enough. He wanted his own island. No, better yet, 3 islands off the coast of Italy.
Mamma mia.
That came true too. And after his daring leap to freedom, all he truly desired was a life filled with endless fun. Let his partners change every night. Let every drag queen in every gritty neighborhood of every world capital know his name. But even that wasn't enough. Not even the deadly diagnosis of AIDS at the time seemed to cool his fire.
I watched him, unable to comprehend how this god, who danced brilliantly on stage in the daylight, transformed into a terrifyingly demonic and haunting figure as darkness fell. I couldn't help but think of Robert Stevenson's novella, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yes, it's that same boy who grew up knowing nothing but poverty, hunger, and the cramped space of a tiny hut in a Bashkir village. The one who thought the greatest sweetness in the world was a baked potato. Only freedom was sweeter. Freedom to move. One day at school, Rudolf saw a dance performed to a Bashkir song. From then on, he couldn't stop dancing. His military father disapproved of his passion. What a disgrace, a son in ballet. But his mother saw the fire in his eyes and supported him. She even scraped together money to take him to the ballet, the performance of the Crane song.
I'll never forget a single detail of that performance. The theater itself, the soft, beautiful glow of crystal chandeliers, the small lanterns glowing everywhere, colorful stained glass, velvet, gold. A completely different world. A place that, to my wide-eyed, dazzled gaze, seemed like something you'd only find in a beautiful, fantastical fairy tale. Something ignited inside me, something special, deeply personal. Something happened to me. I was swept far away from the miserable world I lived in, straight to the heavens.
At 11 years old, Nureyev had accidentally encountered with 70-year-old Anna Udaltsova, a ballerina from Diaghilev's troupe. Thanks to her and the help of her connections, Nureyev arrived at one of the oldest ballet schools in the world, the Leningrad Choreographic School. Today, it's known as the Vaganova Academy of Russian Ballet. Usually, students here begin training at the age of 10. Nureyev was already 17. He wasn't supposed to be accepted, but they took him. He never forgot this lesson. Success is when you break the rules and still get what you want. Nureyev was destined to completely change how audiences viewed male roles in ballet. Before him, the spotlight always belonged to the ballerina, and the man on stage was just there to hold her up, a living prop. But Rudolf would perform with such brilliance that people would start coming to the theater not to see the ballerina, but to marvel at her partner. Nureyev was a difficult student. No one could handle him. The gray-haired instructors were used to being revered and obeyed without question. Nureyev refused to obey anyone. He was seen as a rude bumpkin and humiliated publicly. Eventually, Rudolf was assigned to Alexander Pushkin's class with a scathing recommendation.
I'm sending you a stubborn idiot, a backwards, angry boy who understands nothing about ballet. His elevation is poor, and he can't hold proper positions. See for yourself. And if he continues like this in your class, there'll be no choice but to expel him from the school.
It's important to understand whose hands Nureyev ended up in. The namesake of the great poet, a great teacher of classical dance, Rudolf is a kindred spirit to him. Alexander Pushkin too had grown up in a village and had danced at the Mariinsky Theater for 18 years. His key rule in teaching ballet was simple: don't try to remake someone. This is how he also trained another legend, Mikhail Baryshnikov. After graduating from school, Nureyev stayed in Leningrad. Even though every door was open to the talented young artist, including the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow, but he preferred to keep his distance from the Kremlin and its residents. However, in Leningrad, Nureyev was quickly labeled a dissident. He refused to join the party and always chose rehearsals over meetings. The perfect way to make enemies in those times. They constantly wanted to fire him, but they never did. He was too talented and hard-working.
And so, the path to the heights of ballet opened up before him.
In 1960, Nureyev is urgently summoned back to his homeland. He even had to set aside a suitcase already packed for vacation, but the reason was too important. Khrushchev held a meeting of Soviet scientists. The star of the Mariinsky Theater was already included in the cultural program. A grand reception in the park, shooting competitions, fishing contests, performances by the best artists of the Soviet Union. But most importantly, Nureyev had the chance to see a living genius, the pianist Sviatoslav Richter.
With such fiery and intensely burning eyes, it felt like I could see the hunger with which he devoured the notes when it was his turn to play. He was filled with passionate intensity, and I felt like I understood it completely.
When the performers finished their acts, Khrushchev stood up and delivered a speech about the great power of Soviet art.
The strength of the Soviet state is built on the efforts of millions of Soviet people. This is the key to our future victories in communist development.
But is Richter really just Soviet art? Doesn't he belong to the entire world? Why does ideology try to force him into the strict confines of the system? Are they trying to shove me into those same confines too? In 1959, after extensive debate and hesitation, the celebrated star of the Mariinsky Theater is finally allowed to go on tour to Vienna. He behaves obediently and returns without incident. It's crucial that next time he's allowed to go again. 2 years later, the troupe travels to Paris. And Paris drove Nureyev wild. First, everyone here is in awe of his performances. Second, there's freedom. Nightclubs, bars, and bohemians throwing parties without a care in the world, even naked ones. Meanwhile, dancers from socialist countries are expected to stay in their hotel rooms, boiling sausages with an immersion heater in the sink. Not a chance! Nureyev begins sneaking out of the hotel, wandering the beautiful streets at night, looking for interesting people to meet. Of course, word of this quickly gets back to the USSR. Now that's what I call an impressive personality. When your wild orgies become a topic of discussion at emergency meeting at the KGB.
On June 3rd of this year, reports from Paris indicated that Rudolf Nureyev was repeatedly violating the rules of conduct for Soviet citizens abroad, leaving the hotel alone and returning late at night. Furthermore, he developed close relationships with French artists, some of whom were known to be homosexuals. Despite several preventative discussions and warnings, Nureyev remained defiant and did not change his behavior.
A demand is issued for his immediate return to the USSR. Right in the middle of the tour, Nureyev is terrified. He knows exactly what's waiting for him if the gay bar stories reach home. At best, he would be permanently barred from traveling. At worst, he faced the grim reality of prison and forced psychiatric treatment. Soviet newspapers would later claim Nureyev betrayed his country for money and debauchery. But that's a lie. He stayed because he felt an incredible level of freedom that no Soviet citizen could have dreamed of at the time. Yes, it was possible. An important day, June 16, 1961, at the Paris Le Bourget airport. All members of the Soviet delegation had already checked in, fully prepared to continue their scheduled tour to London. But Nureyev was told he was being urgently recalled for a government performance in the Kremlin and was redirected to the gate marked Moscow. London is out of reach, and maybe not just London. He understood everything. He had one single chance. He literally breaks free from the grasp of his escorts and boldly walks off in the opposite direction without hesitation. Nureyev himself, in an interview given shortly before his death, recounted how he had calmly approached the French police, looked them in the eyes, and quietly said, "I want to be free."
The press in Paris learned that Nureyev declined to be sent back to Russia.
Witnesses recalled that he was practically gasping with fear. His escorts furiously demanded that the French authorities hand over their compatriot immediately, but he was taken away and left alone in a room. Here, he faced the most difficult decision of his life, to request political asylum and leap into the unknown. And he had to do it himself, without anyone else's influence.
Silence fell. I was alone. 4 white walls and 2 doors. 2 paths leading to 2 different lives. For me, it was already the return of a sense of self-worth. The right to choose. The right I had dreamed of more than anything. The right to self-determination.
The leap to freedom. This is the only way the global press described his action the very next day. Nureyev had no time to read or listen to them. He is already rehearsing the bluebird role, so symbolic, in the ballet Sleeping Beauty. The defector was swiftly welcomed into the company by Marquis de Kevas. Before his very first performance, the Soviet embassy sent him 3 letters from home. The first was from Alexander Pushkin. "Wake up! Paris is a city of decadence. It will truly corrupt you and ruin your career." The second letter was from his father, saying he would never understand or forgive him for betraying his homeland. The third was from his mother, who begged, "Come home, please." In a terrible emotional state, Nureyev steps onto the stage. But the humiliation isn't over yet. The seats were bought out by state security and embassy officials. Their jeers and whistles drown out Tchaikovsky's music. And yet, Nureyev dances through it all, as if he himself is the bluebird, the embodiment of an impossible dream for a better world. People can cope with having to leave their homeland. They can endure the sadness and confusion of friends and loved ones left behind. But when your homeland declares you an enemy, it means only one thing: there's no home to return to. Nureyev is sentenced in absentia to 7 years in prison and has his property confiscated. For the rest of his life, he would fear revenge, dreading an attack, abduction, or being left disabled. One of the Soviet defectors, Viktor Shemov, would later reveal that the State Security Committee had indeed discussed an operation to ambush the dancer at night and break both his legs, not to kill him, but to take away what he had escaped for, his freedom to soar. For now, all is well. Nureyev travels and dances wherever he pleases. Fees that were once just large gradually became unbelievably massive. He buys everything he ever dreamed of, including men. Witnesses recall how easily he could grab the attention of any handsome young man and leave for the hotel with him immediately. The next day, he'd show up and meet someone else. Like a starving man at a lavish feast, he devoured everything in sight: fame, money, and lovers. Rudolf's personal assistant once vividly recalled that she had to be his nanny, his surrogate mother, and just about everything else in the world for him.
One time, I rented him a furnished apartment on the ground floor of an elegant building on Eaton Place. At night, he nearly burned the house down while playing with a paraffin-fueled toy train that had been bought for him.
There were rumors that he had affairs with Freddie Mercury, Mick Jagger, Elton John, and Jean Marais. But that's not certain. One day, stepping out of the Paris Opera House, Nureyev saw a crowd of adoring female fans and grumbled, "Hey, where are the boys?" Another fact: this is how he acted in the photographer's house, where he came to discuss a shoot.
He sprawled out in front of the fireplace, looking every bit like a spoiled prince, alternating between sipping whiskey and tea, biting into a brioche one moment and a buttered sandwich the next. At the same time, though clearly struggling, he went through his portraits, tossing aside the ones he didn't think were good enough, setting aside the ones he liked, and jabbing a chubby finger at others.
But even with all his sexual freedom, he was, of course, searching for love. The question was he capable of it? The only deep and lasting bond Nureyev ever had was with the Danish ballet dancer, Erik Brun. Erik was the epitome of a northerner: blonde hair, blue eyes. He is reserved and cold, but in dance, he transformed completely. Just imagine Nureyev beside him, an impulsive, fiery-tempered Eastern man with blood boiling from the inside. The passion ignited instantly.
He's so cold, like ice. But when you touch him, he instantly burns you.
Both of them were completely devoted to their art. They have fewer opportunities to meet. Fiery and impulsive, Nureyev was not willing to give up his freedom. Their intense romance would smolder and flare up again and again for years. Breaking the rules and defying traditions, Nureyev kept doing it everywhere. He was the first to step onto the stage in tights, with no undershirt or proper attire. And he easily chose 42-year-old Margot Fonteyn as his partner. She was 10 years older than him. By the standards of ballet back then, she was already considered retired. In 1964, they performed the lead roles in Swan Lake at the prestigious Vienna Opera, setting a remarkable theatrical record. The applause was so prolonged, the curtain had to be raised more than 80 times. He takes unrestrained self-expression even further. Nureyev behaves terribly with his colleagues and friends. He never carried money, never paid for himself at restaurants or shops, leaving it to friends and assistants to cover the bill. He's often rude and stirs up plenty of drama because he can. After all, he's a star. In a fit of rage, he becomes truly terrifying. He could angrily fling a tea tray against the wall or violently hurl an ashtray at a mirror. They say that at a reception with the English queen, Nureyev simply took off his shoes because he was getting too hot. By the 1980s, a life of complete indulgence and excess began to bear bitter fruit. Nureyev is diagnosed with HIV and later with AIDS. He refused to believe he would die. Of course, he hides his illness and continues to recklessly change lovers uncontrollably. Today, we know that HIV is just a virus, no different from many others, and absolutely anyone can become a carrier. But in the 80s and 90s, it was the most shameful disease on the planet. Gay cancer, as they called it, or God's punishment for immorality and sodomy. However, the troubles didn't end there. Nureyev faced multiple attempts to remove him from his position as director of the Paris Opera Ballet. While he was dealing with this, another devastating blow arrived. Erich Brunn was dying, reportedly of lung cancer. Rudolf dropped everything and flew to Toronto to say a final goodbye to the love of his life. He found Erich in a semi-conscious state and was completely overwhelmed with grief.
All I could do was lie down next to him, hold him gently, and just be there by his side.
Learning to say goodbye is a skill we often underestimate. But sooner or later, we all have to learn to part with those we truly love. In 1987, Nureyev was granted special permission to return to the Soviet Union to say a final goodbye to his ailing mother. His visa was granted for 72 hours. He was forbidden from contacting any of his friends. He found his mother in very poor health. She no longer recognized the boy she had once lovingly taken to his very first ballet. 2 years later, he was allowed to perform on the stage of his home theater in Leningrad. It had been 25 years since he had gone. He no longer had the strength to perform as he did at the height of his career. In the audience, he saw his friends, family, and former partners: Dudinskaya, Osipenko, Kurgapkina, Kolpakova, and Terstepanova. His first teacher, the centenarian Anna Udaltsova, even attended. Nureyev was warmly received, but the next day, a newspaper wrote that the applause was meant for the past. In 1991, his illness began to progress rapidly, and Nureyev ended up spending far more time in hospitals than at home. A year later, he bid ballet farewell for good. For the very last time, he stepped onto the stage after directing La Bayadère. The audience applauded as the curtain fell, and French Minister of Culture Jacques Lang presented Nureyev with the Order of Arts and Letters. Nureyev had no strength left. He was gravely ill and needed constant support to stand. The last 100 days of his life were spent in a Paris hospital. He passed away quietly, without suffering. The doctor by his bedside said the great Nureyev's face was calm, peaceful, even beautiful in its serenity. He was buried at the Russian cemetery of Sainte-Geneviève-des-Bois in Paris. This well-known cemetery is often visited by tourists. Neat rows of graves, gray headstones, sorrow, grief, thoughts of eternity, but not Nureyev's grave. His is covered with a bright mosaic carpet of shimmering colors. He wouldn't have approved of gray stone. Even in death, he had to stand out and be remembered. Besides, if you've already started breaking all the rules, there's no reason to stop, even after your own death. Freedom is infectious, and of course everyone deserves it. The real question is, what will we do with it? Will we recognize where our freedom ends and another's begins, or will we blur the lines? Be happy. Fight for your freedom. And if you decide to make the leap to a freer, better version of yourself, be sure to carefully think about how you'll land and what comes next.